make some eyeballs today. And we're going to be using a kind of a pre-made eyeball. Excuse me. We're going to be making a pre-made eyeball. And yes, I still have to work on the hair here. You can see it's just kind of a big mess. But I'm not going to worry about that today because today is reserved for eyeballs. So we'll be replacing these spheres that we currently have in here. For right now, leave the spheres in, just for the time being, but hide everything except for the head that you're working on and the spheres for the eyes. Everything else you should hide, including eyelashes. All right. So the tricky part I have found doing this over the years is getting the size of the pupil correct and the size of the iris correct are surprisingly tricky. So the first thing I want to say is you really need to, I can't emphasize this enough, use some kind of reference when you do this. So first and foremost, make a texture plane that's going to have the reference image on it. So get your IZTL from either ZBrushWorkshop.com, that's going to be here, or excuse me, not ZBrush Workshop, ZBrushGuides.com. This gives you a huge amount of information. It gives you a video with a lot of the stuff I'm about to go over, and it also gives you a PDF file. So this is what you want. This is what we're using. This is going to be how we create these eyeballs. So download the eyeballs from ZBrush Guides or go to your resource directory. Either one. It's free, by the way. You don't have to pay for it unless you want to, but it's available either place for you. So having said that, that's where you're going to get it. Now let's load it in. Whenever I load a ZTL file, I'll typically pick some kind of primitive, whether it's a gear or whether it's a star or whatever. I don't care. Any of these, it doesn't really matter under 3D meshes. I'll always do this when importing OBJs, or almost always, but I even do it sometimes when I load the ZTL just because it's a force of habit thing, but I don't want to replace the current object on the screen. And so I'm careful sometimes to pick a primitive because it will replace the primitive oftentimes with your OBJ. And if you don't know what I'm talking about here, I'll go back to this arrow, which is a primitive, and I'll click import, and I'll just import any OBJ, and what you're going to see, a cat, okay, there's my cat. That arrow is probably gone. Interestingly, it's still in the subtool palette, but it's just, I've found over the years, it's just safer anyway to have a primitive on the screen when I import stuff, especially OBJs. This is not a perfect model. You can already tell that it's got some weird stuff on the top. That's a mistake, I can tell you for sure. Not meant to be there. You could try and smooth it out yourself by holding down the shift button, but you're probably not going to see that part of the eyeball anyway, so it's not really a big deal. Your eye is split into 3 subtools. We have the eye shine subtool, which I don't know why they call that. That's a cornea. I mean, if you want to rename this, you can, but it's not necessary to, but it is indeed a cornea. So a cornea is the lens that surrounds your eye. So we can turn this off because it's basically just covering the eye. Then we have the pupil, which is the hole in your eye. In the case of this particular ZTL, the pupil is not a hole as it is in a real eyeball, but it's actually a piece of geometry. So one thing you could do if you wanted to is just simply move the pupil forward and scale it until it's the right shape and size. So that's one option, but let's not do that just yet. I just want you to know it's there. The first subtool is basically your iris. I know it doesn't say iris, but it's really what it is. Again, you can rename it if it bothers you. Kind of bothers me a little bit, but that's not what's important here, right? So there's my iris. What's important is how to get all this detail out of the eye. We can find this in our layers palette. So scroll down the layers and we're going to start to see we have all this detail here. First, when I say detail, I mean a way to create detail, such as, well, real details. I just push up on the slider, and there it is. Those are the real details. It's almost like cheating. It's cheating. I mean, it's yeah. It's using somebody else's work, arguably stealing or cheating. But we're just trying to make things faster and easier. We don't have to always reinvent the wheel here. So let's pull the iris size down, not up, but down. And this is immediately where we might want to start to look at some reference. Because I could change this iris size to be, I could guess, basically. But I've done this for many years, and it's almost impossible to guess perfectly what the iris size should be, any more than it's a good idea to guess what the pupil size is. It's very difficult. So what I have a tendency to do is, again, bring in some kind of photo reference. So append a plane or insert a plane. This is going to come in as a new subtool. It's bisecting my eye, which I don't want. So I'll rotate this. Hold down Shift. Rotate it 90 degrees. Next, move it and or scale it so it's not just like right in front of your eye. We're going to put our reference on this. And yes, this is where you want to go back to loading in reference that you probably used for your scan initially. So import your reference. And I feel like we had said that picture 7 was a pretty good one to pick. You can change the size of your icons, and that might be a little bit easier to see, assuming that they update. Mine are not really updating. They're updating really slowly. So I don't know if I have time for all of these to update. I know that the one I want is a front-facing reference. And I feel like number 7 was one that we could see was pretty well front-facing. Let's try 8. And it should appear in your texture palette. And there it is. It's either 7 or 8. I'll import 7 too. Generally, ZBrush likes BMP files. It likes PSD files. Obviously, it's gonna support TIFF. That's what I currently have. Now this plane, I'll go back down to my texture palette and I'll click Texture Map and point to 7. And there it is. You might want to rotate your plane. And here's something else that might be a good tip, is to fill this material with a flat color. The way we do that is to switch to flat color. And then after you have it switched to flat color, you can see it's not really like, it's not having the light in the scene affect it. So change this button from RGB, which is color, to mRGB, which is material plus color. Go to color, fill object. And now this image plane is filled with this material and this color, right? And this is, again, just so I get a kind of a rough idea of what the size of the iris and pupils should be. And typically I'm going to mention here that typically they're usually smaller than you think they should be. So it's usually better to err on the side of things being a little too small than too big. Go back to layers, and in layers now just simply change the size until you feel like you're getting close to your reference. Try to get as close as possible to your reference. Remember that 3/4 or more of your eye is covered by your eye socket. So keep that in mind. Once you have your iris roughly the size that you think it should be, then you can crank on the real details. And yeah, it's cheating. And yeah, it's just using somebody else's iris details. But there it is. He's got blue eyes. So then, because he has blue eyes, I would find the blue slider and pull that up and we just basically have very blue eyes, right? Pretty easy. We could turn up brown, combine the two. We get a pretty nice effect there. That's looking pretty good. So don't use cartoon details because we're not making a cartoon eye. So please don't do this. And red, same thing. We're not making a zombie. So please don't just pull up red. Or green, maybe. I can see that for somebody with partially green eyes. But he's got blue eyes, so I'm pretty happy with what I have now. There's a little more blue down here, I guess. That's a little too blue. Blue enough. Okay. Here's the tricky part. Veins and how red the eye should be. This is surprisingly tricky because you want the red to come up at least halfway from the back of the eyeball. So you actually want a lot more red than you might imagine. Don't touch the yellow because we're not making some kind of monster. So please, no yellow, no zombie stuff. But pull up the red until you see the red goes at least halfway or more across the eyeball. And this is a little tricky because if you make the eyes too red, then he's just going to look like he hasn't slept, and that's not good. But if you don't make the eyes red enough, then we're not going to get the red in the corners of the tear ducts and the corners of the eyes. And I guess the last thing I have to say on this is that if you need to go back later and paint some of this in, like poly paint it in, you can. But try and get close. We've got veins too. I don't typically go too aggressive on the veins because, again, I'm not trying to create a monster. So this is like way too much. So then the veins are usually a pretty subtle touch. And since we're not going to see the veins typically, I don't spend too much time with them. Again, unless you're making a monster, in which case that's a whole different story. But if you're making a human, then probably you don't need too much in the way of veins. All right. We'll pull back on that. So I think that's okay for the iris. Hopefully the iris isn't too big. And again, I try to err on the side of making it a little smaller than I think I need. It's almost always a better idea to make it a little smaller than you think. This is really hard to go back after the fact. So this is one of those things where, yes, you can go back and recreate the eye, but you try to get the scale right as close as possible by looking at your reference. It's really difficult without the head and eye socket there, so it's again difficult, but do your best. If you're happy with it and you're not going to go back, you can click Bake All. That's going to get rid of all of these layers. I won't do that quite yet because I prefer to keep this intact in case I want to go back to it. But I do need to work on the pupil. So the pupil does have layers, and I just want to state right now that I don't often use the layers on the pupil because, well, they're sometimes broken. Watch, you see what I mean? Maybe I'll get lucky. Like, here's the position. That seems to be working well. So your position obviously shifts the pupil forwards and backwards. And honestly, in a real human eye, this would just be the hole, right? It would be literally this hole. But in the case of this IZTL, we actually have this black disc that we're dealing with. But when I crank on size, oh, they're working. Hey, look at that. Sliders are actually doing what they're supposed to. The layers are actually doing what they were supposed to. Awesome. If for some reason this doesn't work for you, because it oftentimes breaks for me for some reason. So if it breaks for you, I want to give you an alternate way to do it. So if these layers are broken and you just are really frustrated because the layers are broken, sometimes happens. At least for the pupil, it's not a big deal. For the iris, it's a big deal. But for the pupil, you don't really have to worry about it because we could just bake the layers, get rid of them, and then use your move tool, and then just simply move and scale. And you're doing the same thing that the layers would do anyway, so who cares, right? So in this particular case, it doesn't matter. When you're placing the pupil, don't place it too far into the eye because you're going to get this problem where the detail intersects and it looks really bad. So we can't push it too far into the eyeball because you're going to get just sort of weird intersecting detail here. So push it in front of the iris, but only just a little bit. So it's just barely in front. If you push it too far in front, then it's going to look really weird. It's going to create a weird drop shadow. So you want to push it just barely in front of the iris. And that's it. I finished. I do feel like maybe the red is a touch too much. Let's pull back a little bit on the red. So then go back to that layer. And this is why you don't want to bake these layers in, because then you won't be able to get back to your sliders in case you need to do something like pull the red back a little bit. Not too much, but a little bit. And we can always poly paint it back in later. Okay. So if you are happy with this, we want to merge all of these into a new tool, which we're then going to move into the head. I will always keep this intact if I need to go back to it. So I keep the layers on the iris intact, and I keep the subtool separate for this subtool. For this IZTL. I can always go back to it. But now the next step is to get rid of your polygroups by hitting Command W or Control W. So then that way this only has one polygroup. Get rid of your polygroups on this guy, Control W, one polygroup. Get rid of your pupil polygroup if it has more than one. I think it's just one, so that's not really a big deal. By the way, your pupils are going to be flipped by default. That is to say, they're normals. I know that sounds weird, but the normals are flipped on the eyeball. And you can't really tell. Just trust me on this. If we go to Display Properties, you're going to see, oh, see, it's invisible. So this is a little bit of a gotcha. I hope you guys are paying attention, because this is really going to drive you up the wall if you don't know about this. Make sure under Display Properties, we click the Flip button. This is going to flip the normals or flip the visibility or flip the eye so that it's basically facing the right direction. And now we have the visibility that we want. If we flip again, it becomes invisible because the back side of the eye is invisible because, again, the normals are facing the wrong direction. If I click the flip button again, now the normals are facing the right direction. We can see the front of the eye. We're good to go. So I just want to make sure everybody knows about that. Flip the normals under Display Properties, and then just click the flip button and you should be good. Don't depend on double. That does not help you. Turn double off. Double is just saying, hey, we're imagining that this is a double-sided thing. Still feel like even the pupil is a little bit large, so we'll scale that down even a touch. Don't let it intersect the iris. Okay, I think that I'm about right, I hope. Still feel like the iris is still a touch. Like I said, I tend to err on the side of things being a little bit too small versus too large. But I think this is about ready. Almost there. All right. So if you feel like you're ready and everything has one polygroup, iris has one polygroup, cornea has one polygroup. So turn the visibility on for everything. Turn off the reference image plane, or that's what it is. Just a plane with a reference on it. And now we want to merge all these together to make a new subtool under Merge Visible. Now, that leaves this tool intact. Notice that nothing has changed here, but we now have a new merged cornea here. And this, by the way, has all three still intact. They've just been temporarily merged together. Now we go back to the head, and now we deal with putting the eye back in there. Let's switch back to basic white material. Here we go. And if this color is distracting you, which it might distract you, that's fine. Just go to Poly Paint, turn the colorize button off. Hopefully you should get back to just your basic white material. Now let's add the eyeballs, and we still have the old eyeballs in place, so we're kind of going to roughly try to match these, roughly. At least that's the plan. And I'm going to hope that the iris and the pupil look good. I'll click append or insert, click on the merged one, and now where did the eyeball? Oh my God, it's all the way up there. Right. So now we have to move, scale, and rotate the eyeball until it's in the right place. We can pretty much guarantee that the eyeball is rotated the wrong direction. So first step, I click this little map icon. It looks like an upside down teardrop. This is going to center my pivot point. Once the pivot point is centered, I'll rotate it. If you want to hold down Shift, that should help you get to 90 degrees. And now it's facing the right direction. And now you can basically move, scale, and rotate the eye into place. So push it back. F for fit. Scale it down. At this point, I like to turn on my wireframe. That's Shift F, so that I can start to see what the wireframe is doing. The pole of the cornea, or pole of the eye, should be facing outwards. And now, again, we can move and scale and rotate until we get one new eye matching the old one. This is where things get tricky because it's really hard to see what I'm doing now. And so this is when you should probably turn on transparency. And with your transparency on, and you can toggle your ghosting on and off. I prefer the ghosting on. But now, this will really help us move the eye into place. And you can actually kind of tell that the scale of the eye is kind of large, but that's okay. It's actually bigger than you might expect. And then we can match it to the other eyeball. F for fit. Obviously, we need to do this in multiple angles. And if we need to go and, go ahead and scale the eyeball, we could do that a little bit. And move, scale, rotate until it makes sense. I'm a little concerned that it's sort of sticking out the eye socket, but let's just keep going with the process. Yeah, it's definitely a little too far forward in the head. Now it's too far back. So this is kind of a delicate thing, and we just kind of have to be careful. And like I said, try and match the other eyeball. Maybe it is a little too big, because we don't want it poking out the sides. Control plus up arrow key allows me to shift the eyeball to the top. Kind of like, where's the other eyeball? Okay, it's there. And this is my new one. You can use your arrow key to go up and down. You can kind of actually see that the old eyeball was shifted a little too far to the left. So the old eyeball in this case is not good. It's way too close to the center of the head. In fact, I'm just going to delete it because I know it's not good. So if you know it's bad, delete it. Get rid of it. Same with the other one. Okay. Go back to the new eyeball. It needs to be pushed forward a little bit more. Maybe rotated. Shift F. Look how I'm using the pole of the cornea, because I know that the pole of the cornea is where the eye is going to point. Turn off transparency as needed. And it still feels maybe like a touch too big. There we go. Getting closer. rotate a little bit. If you want to make a new image plane and load in your image again, that might not be a bad idea at this point. But again, I'm using the pole, that is to say, the point, the center point in my cornea with the wireframe on to really help me aim the eyeball. Okay, and I'm not going to guarantee that this is going to be perfect, but this is kind of close. So the way that we can check this now is to split the eyeball back apart, because you're never going to be able to know if this works unless the cornea is hidden, which right now the cornea is covering the iris. So what do? We say split by groups or group split. That's why earlier I asked you guys to make a separate polygroup for each part of the eye. So when I click group split, we get our 3 parts back. I turn the cornea off, and oh my God. What is going on here? It's like maybe the eye, that's a little strange. Maybe the eye socket is not far enough back in the head. I'm beginning to wonder, actually. And the interior of the eye is specifically what I'm referring to here. So just to be completely clear about what I'm talking about, I'll turn off my wireframe and I'll use my damn standard to kind of dig more into the eyeball. Oh, there we go. That's what I'm looking for there. Now it's revealing. Whoops, a little too much. So be careful. Make a smaller brush. Carefully dig around the interior of the eye until I'm revealing, the eyeball. But now you can see what I mean about the iris being too big. So everybody hopefully can totally see that the iris is still too big. So I would have 2 options at this point. I could go back to the original IZTL and make the iris smaller. So that's one way or one thing that I could do. It's one option. But another option, which I feel like is going to be faster for me, is just simply to scale the whole eye back down a touch. And by scaling the whole eye down, it's a little dangerous, but at least hopefully will prevent me from having to go back to the other eye tool and recreate the iris again, which I'm kind of not wanting to do. Okay. Oops. All right. So what am I talking about? Well, I'll show you here in a minute once I clean up the interior eye slightly. Let's zoom out and see how it's looking. It's not terrible, but the eye is kind of pointing inwards a little bit. We're getting a bit of a cross-eyed effect. So, unfortunately, in order to move the eye or rotate the eye at this point, sadly, I'm going to have to merge these parts back down. And I know that's really inconvenient to do that. There might be a little bit of a workaround, but generally speaking, it's better to merge this stuff all down. So let's do that. We can always split the polygroups back apart. So merge down so that the eye all becomes, again, another solid object. So back to what we were doing. I really kind of wish I could make just the cornea semi-transparent, and that would make this a little bit easier. Use the upside down teardrop or the map icon to center. Don't forget that the Alt will let you change what the pivot is doing. So if you feel like the pivot is not correct, or hold down Alt, and that's going to help you. So scale the whole damn thing. And now I'm afraid the eye is getting a little too small, but scale it, move it so that the cornea is kind of just there. And we'll rotate it out a little bit more this way. So every time you want to move, scale, and rotate, sadly, you kind of have to merge it all back together. Move, scale, rotate. Do it with the wireframe on, and that typically helps. And like I said, if your original eye socket's fighting you, like it is in my case, go to your damn standard brush and very carefully dig out the inside of the eye a little bit more. And that should help fix that. Okay, now, I've got to split it back apart. So group split. And once you've got back to group split, then you can hide your cornea. And we're getting something a bit better. I still feel like the iris is too big, personally. But again, you have two options. Either scale down the entire eye or go back to the original eye and make the iris smaller. The layers are no longer intact, sadly. So there's really no easy way to do this other than, as I keep saying, scale the whole eye at once, which may give you problems because really you want the eye to reach beyond the tear ducts. So really I feel like I'm kind of trying to make this work when ultimately I should just go back to the other ZTL. Or, excuse me, go back to the other tool and fix it the right way, because me scaling it down in this case I think is just kind of giving me more problems. Not really helping things per se, but I'm willing to try one more time with the scale. And that's going to be the last time, because any smaller than that, the eye is definitely too small. Group split apart. Is the iris better? Hopefully. Let's see. Hide the cornea. Yeah, actually. It's pretty close. I'm still fighting the eye socket issues. Use your damn standard to really model the inside of the eye. Oh, missed. And you might have to push this back up here. And that's okay. I'm just using the damn standard to do this. Kind of dig out the eye socket. And if you're like, those pupils are still way, way too big. I'm kind of or not pupils, but iris rather. Iris still feels way too big. I'm kind of in agreement. I mean, I kind of feel like it definitely is still too big. So I mentioned this now a few times, but you typically want to you want to err on the side of making the iris a little bit smaller. This looks a little on the cartoony side even now. So where are we with time before I do this all over again? 8:43. We don't have time. Damn. Okay. Well, shoot. Then I guess I would just have to tell you, go back to the original ZTL here, or the original eye that you should still have. Go back to the iris, and then just go ahead and use the layers to push the iris down the size a little bit more. I told you it was going to be smaller than you expected. No, wrong way. So push the iris size down a little bit more. And it's so hard to guess, even with photo reference, it's just really hard. And then of course, take the iris, I keep saying iris, pupil, like why am I confusing them all the time? Okay. Push the pupil forward a little bit, maybe even scale this guy down, and then you would go ahead and put this back into the head. I know it's frustrating. But since we don't have really the time to do that right now, I guess I'm just going to duplicate this. I'll merge this down one more time because unfortunately it still feels like the eye is a little cross-eyed. So I'll center the pivot point, move it slightly to the right, but definitely rotate the eye again slightly to the right. It's really easy, unfortunately, to make the eyes cross-eyed or wall-eyed, and it's just a hard thing to fix. So, whoops, that's too much. Let's pull back a little bit more. That's still too much. One thing that helps a little bit is to turn your wireframe on. I think we're about there. Still feels like it's looking to the right a little bit. But since I'm about out of time, I'll just go ahead and go with it. So duplicate the eye, or duplicate the subtool, and then if you guess just moving it over to the other side, you were right. And you might say, well, can I just mirror that? Well, you could mirror it if we weren't using scan data. But since we are using scan data, we just kind of have to duplicate it and move it. Sorry. Our mirroring is not really available to us right now, at least not yet. So then do your best to try to get the eyes lined up. You do not ever want to change the scale. You might want to subtly move or rotate one eye against the other, but never, I repeat, never change the scale. The eyeballs are going to be the same size. So you're welcome to move the eyeball just a touch, and you're definitely welcome to rotate the eyeballs, but please do not scale them individually from each other. Anyway, I'm hoping that he's not going to be cross-eyed or wall-eyed right now, and so the test is just to break apart the subtools or group split them. Going down here to split, group split. Do that with both. And then once you've done it with both, you can then hide the cornea. So this guy I want to split also, group split. And I'm already going to tell you the irises are just too big. I can tell you just by looking at it. But there it is. There are our eyes. And you can also see, wow, the irises are way too big. I told you that was going to happen. I warned you. And then again, just use the damn standard to hollow in the eye. Like that. It's not the worst, but the irises are definitely a smidgen on the too large size. It would be best to try to get the irises to be a little bit smaller and the pupils to be a little smaller. He's looking a little cartoony, to be completely honest with you, but since I'm out of time for the demo, I have to call it done for right now. We may have to go back and readjust some of the eyelashes a little bit now that I've altered the eyes a touch. But that's it. That's the process. So again, I would need to go back. I would need to make the irises a bit smaller, maybe the pupils a bit smaller. I would need to readjust the eyelashes because now that I've adjusted the eyes and the eye sockets a bit, the eyelashes don't really fit like they used to. And Zbrush is deciding now is the time to autosave my project. So thanks, Zbrush. Okay, that's done at least. But yeah, like your eyelashes, if they don't really work because of what you just did, then don't be afraid to go to the regular move brush. That's BMV. And that allows me to move around a lot of eyelashes at once. Oops, make sure I'm on the right subtool. So select the eyelashes and then move around your eyelashes. This way. Oops. And you got to be gentle, obviously. Right? So if you have to hold down Alt to push in, you can do that. Or just move up this. Or hold down Alt to push in. So I think I'm officially out of time. But yeah, you may need to go back in and tweak your eyelashes a little bit. That's possible that may need to be done. It's not uncommon. Okay. I guess that's it. I mean, again, the pupil and iris are definitely a little bit too big. But since I'm out of time for the demo, at least you have the general idea of how it's done. I will go back. I will make the irises and pupils smaller, and then I will re-import the eyes. Pay attention to your cornea. Make sure that the cornea is not going past the eyelid. So note how the cornea does not go past the eyelid. So watch the cornea especially. It can't go past the eyelid. And I guess that's it for the demo. Like I said, sorry about the irises and pupils being a little too large. I kind of called that one a mile away. But it's not that hard to fix. I just have to go back to my original IZTL. Uh-oh, did I merge it? Nope, here it is. I need to go back to this original IZTL that I still have intact. And again, make the iris and pupil smaller, then re-import back in. I have not found necessarily an easier way to do this because unfortunately when you bring this into the other tool, it gets rid of your layers. And that's an unfortunate part about this workflow. These layers get baked down anyway once you create merge visible, or once you click merge visible, then all your layers go away. So it's like, well, I don't know any other way to gauge this other than sort of looking at my photo reference, but I think everybody can agree that there's some problems here. The eyes are slightly cross-eyed, and the pupils and irises are a little too large. But hey, like I said, I'm out of time, so I guess I have to stop and fix it off the Twitch stream. Or maybe I'll make another Twitch stream in which I make the iris and pupil a little more accurate. And then when I do that, I'll also fix the hair. But just remember, if your polygroups are intact, you can easily split it back apart. So if I need to merge this back down, that's not a big deal. That's going to allow me to rotate the eye so he's not cross-eyed. And then split it back apart to check. I wish there was an easier way, like I didn't have to constantly be splitting this apart and merging it back together all the time. But I haven't figured out a way that I can move, scale, and rotate all three elements and still see them. It doesn't really work. Like I have to kind of group split, hide the cornea, check, and then rinse, wash, repeat. But that's better. He's not quite as cross-eyed as he was. I guess that's it, guys. I got to sign off now. I'll take a look at the Discord chat, see if there are any questions, but that's pretty much it for the eye demo. Please try and do this for homework, or fix your hair, fix your eyelashes, and fix your eyes. And that's it.